Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
Hello everyone, I'm Troy Moling and thanks for joining us today on Market Journal. Hope you've had a good week even with the bitterly cold weather. Lots to tell you about on today's show. And we're beginning with markets this week. Tuesday's WASDE report lowered ending stocks for corn and soybeans while increasing exports. Corn exports were raised 50 million bushels. Soybean exports were raised 20 million from last month. Soybean ending stocks were also reduced to 120 million bushels, which is down 77% from last year and the lowest since 2014. Doug Simon of Tredas joined me this week to offer his take on the report and what else he's tracking in ag.
I think everybody really wanted to see bigger exports yesterday that would draw down that corn balance sheet. So I think USDA was pretty conservative on those export numbers. You know, analysts were kind of hoping maybe it'd been a little bit more aggressive, but typical USDA, they're going to be pretty conservative. They're not going to get real, aggressive early on here. They're going to wait till they see more confirmation of actual shipments to China. We've got a lot of stuff on the books, but we're going to need to. We've got a lot of corn to move, actually put on trains and get out of the country yet.
Doug, and it wasn't just corn, soybeans with a major reduction too. And it's a different picture with soybeans when compared to past years, isn't it?
They are. I mean, we were a billion bushels 2 years ago, and we just had such a dramatic demand increase from China, as they go to restock those supplies. And when they've done that, we've drawn down stocks that we haven't seen, since 2012, 13 type time frame. And the interesting thing is when you start throwing together acres for this year, if we plant 90 million acres of beans, which is up 7 million acres from last year, and if we plant 93 million acres of corn, we're still going to have 120 million bushel of carryover beans going into next year. So we're not going to alleviate this issue in one crop year, which I haven't seen that for a long, long time. I don't know if I've ever seen it this tight, this early.
Okay, so Doug, where do we go from here?
I think the big thing going forward now, like we've got USDA's got their Outlook conference next week. It's going to be interesting to see is when they bring in all the China experts. It's like, why hasn't the FAS, Foreign Ag Service, or our commercial contacts on the ground in China, why haven't they seen these different, exports, levels that we're currently engaged in? So that's going to be interesting next week, see what they come up with. And then as we go into the spring, it's just going to be a matter of, what kind of acre base are we going to plant next year? I think all eyes are going to be on that right now.
All right, moving on from the WASDE, and I had a viewer who emailed a question to me last week. This was John from Scotts Bluff. He was asking about a price forecast for corn this fall. Now, that's over 6 months away. Lots can happen between now and then, but how would you answer that question for John in Scotts Bluff?
That's a great question, John. When you look back at this last year and when you look at price projections where we were for the current crop, what the acre base and potential demand. I mean, we were looking at potentially having a 3.2 to 3.3 billion bushel carryover. And now we're half of that basically, or actually less. We're down in that 1.5 billion bushel range. So in terms of trying to project that far out, it's so hard. I mean, this last year we had the derecho, we had the late season drought in the US, and USDA came back and revised stocks lower, 3 different times, which is massive, adjustment, which is basically based off the 2019 crop in terms of the prevent plant and lower acres. So it's pretty fraught to go out and try to predict what's going to happen going out, into next year. But when you look at those acre bases and you look at the yields, I mean, our numbers are going to be tight. Now, you've got prices that are very profitable right now relative to where our break evens are. And so it's like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. You want to sell over time. You want to be open to basis. I think our basis levels for harvest this upcoming year are going to be tremendous because go back to what I've been saying the last 2-3 years. We had, hot basis that was hot. It's going to be really hot this year coming off the combine for soybeans because how tight those carryovers will be. And then if you look at the corn side of it, we should see pretty good, corn basis levels as well, just because the stocks are going to be tight and going to be a lot of, competition, for those bushels, which is good to see.
Okay, let's go back to what you said about China. So they've always been a big player when it comes to buying soybeans, but really they have been stepping it up lately when it comes to corn. So give us an idea of why that's been happening. Is this all just due to them rebuilding that hog industry after ASF?
Part of it's the ASF, and they're still battling issues with that, with disease issues. So you kind of start to grow and then knock the herd back again. But China is such a hard, country to evaluate. We have a hard time estimating, what's over there and getting a good handle on what's in the country. And I think even in the U.S., we work with a lot of really good farmers, and you have to really be careful on watching those stocks and making sure they're in good shape. I just don't understand how you can keep corn in China that long without it deteriorating. Is it going to be any good for ethanol? What kind of quality is it to be fed? So I think those stocks that are available to the marketplace, I think the quality is a big issue and a big question. And I think we're probably kind of where the rubber's hit the road, where those stocks aren't as good as quality as what everybody thought. There's not as many stocks available. This last year, China had some real flooding. They're worried about the Three Gorges Dam at one time, and then it was really dry up in the Northeast. So, their production levels over there probably, maybe not quite the production, but even actually USDA in their report on Tuesday, they actually bumped up their production there by about 4.5 million metric tons, which is a little bit of a surprise.
And finally, Doug, as we wrap up here, any marketing or risk management advice that you'd like to leave us with today?
I think you want to look into next year. People are wondering, what do we do? Historically, we do pre-harvest marketing where we sell, kind of February through June timeframe, which we're in that February timeframe. The crop insurance values are being established right now, but in terms of trying to predict what the market's going to do, we want to sell increments over time. You've got good futures levels right now, and I think there'll be good opportunities, like I said, going into next year to set basis. So we always look at decoupling futures and the basis decision, and then taking advantage. Probably not going to be a lot of carries if we're going to be that tight on the stocks, but there should be some really good basis opportunities going forward.
Next week, we'll be joined by Darren Fessler of Lakefront Futures and Options. Next up, for most producers, planting during the winter is a rarity. However, from the perspective of potential forage, winter may hold a good opportunity to make improvements to your pasture by implementing some alternative legume seeding options. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently caught up with Nebraska Extension educator Ben Beckman to find out more.
When it comes to forage, the winter months are typically a time for using resources that we have on hand while making a game plan for the following growing season. On the other hand, if conditions are favorable, winter may be the perfect opportunity to consider interseeding legumes to improve pasture production.
Now, when we look at why we want to go out and put legumes into a pasture, there's kind of two big factors that play into that. One of them is legumes are going to be a higher quality forage for our animals. So when we're looking at, just what we're providing for that animal to eat, especially over the course of the year, a lot of times these interseeding legumes is going to work well. If we're looking at something like maybe a wet meadow in the sandhills or on the eastern side of the state where we have a lot of cool season grasses in those situations, those grasses are typically going to kind of slump off during the summer. And that legume is just another factor to carry that quality of forage through that midsummer slump and just maintain that quality throughout the grazing period. The other thing that we can have that drives that factor to put legumes into a pasture is the fact that legumes, fix their own nitrogen. If we do have a pasture that we're managing and that we normally supply nitrogen fertilizer for, because that biomass portion is going to be made up with some plant that's supplying its own nitrogen, the amount of fertilizer that we have to put over the entire pasture is going to be lessened. So we have a little bit of a benefit there when we look especially at that nitrogen fertilizer that we're not going to have to apply as much.
There are several factors you'll want to keep in mind when deciding where to plant. In this circumstance, an old real estate adage comes to mind. It's all about location, location, location.
When we're looking at getting legumes established in a pasture, the first thing that we kind of want to look at is any management considerations that we might have. If we've got a pasture that's got a lot of weed pressure in it already, legumes are going to be really sensitive to herbicides. So if we know that we're going to have to go out and do some spraying for something like leafy spurge or some thistles throughout the year, and we're just going to knock out those legumes that we just got established, it's probably not a good place to go out and do your interseeding. Another thing that we kind of have to look at is where we're going to get good germination rates. Legumes can be a little bit tricky sometimes, so we need to have proper pH. They're sensitive to phosphorus, so if we've got some pastures where we've done some soil testing in the past, we know that we fall within those ranges that legumes prefer. And then the last thing that we can kind of look at in just ideal locations to put some of these things into practice is, again, looking at what we can actually physically do and where that labor is going to be worth it. If we know that we've got a highly productive pasture, again, drilling might be an option. If we've got a pasture where we can't really, physically get a drill to, some of these other techniques that we're going to talk about might be the route that we can go to get some seed out there that we're not going to actually have to go and get equipment into that pasture where maybe the topography or something is preventing that.
Once you've established a pasture to begin interseeding, there are a few different options at your disposal when it comes to planting. Drilling will usually be your best bet. Unfortunately, winter doesn't always allow us the easiest path.
When we've got frozen ground, drilling's not an option if we can't get that drill in the ground, and that's going to be our number one option if we want to make sure we have good, germination. So that's one thing to consider. When we're looking at something, especially like frost seeding, we're actually using that freeze thaw action, that heaving of the soil to get seed from the soil surface down into the rest of the soil. And so we're actually utilizing, some of the natural occurring temperature fluctuations that we get in the winter to our benefit in those circumstances. So as long as we don't have a whole lot of snow cover in those instances where we're making sure that the seed can get down to the ground, we're utilizing what we have in the winter to actually plant the seed. So, you can put seed out when we have some snow. The really big concern that we have is that, especially with those legume seeds that we're looking at, they're small, hard seed. And if we start getting some big snow melt, that's going to start clumping those up, as that snow melts and that water moves, it might move it off of your property. So you're just kind of wasting seed in those circumstances where you're going to just have clumps. You're not going to get good distribution, or it's going to move off your property into the ditch or your neighbor's pasture or wherever, and you're paying for seeding that area and not where you actually want it. So having a more open, field to work with is going to be ideal, especially from a frost seeding standpoint. When we're looking at something like feeding seed, that seed's going to be contained in a manure pat. And so the likelihood of it moving a little bit more is less. But again, we want to make sure that it gets down to the ground and that it's germinating on the ground, not sooner than, if that cow pat's on some manure or on a snow pile and it starts the germination process early for some reason and doesn't get roots established, that can affect things as well.
If you happen to notice within the division of labor on your operation that you seem to have a bit of free time through the winter months, this could be the most opportune time to take a good look at the prospect of interseeding. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. To learn more about your options for interseeding legumes, you can check out the link we've posted on the Market Journal website. Next up, while the world continues to deal with coronavirus, a new strain of avian flu is spreading across the Eastern Hemisphere. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh spoke with UNL Poultry Veterinarian and Professor Don Reynolds to learn more.
2021 continues to be a pandemic year, but not only for humans. The avian flu strain H5N8, which surfaced in 2020, has continued to spread between migrating birds across Europe and Asia.
The reports are that it started about a year ago in February of last year, and the first reports were in Saudi Arabia. And then that was in the spring, late winter and spring. And then over the summer, attributed to the waterfowl movement, it moved up into areas of Russia and Kazakhstan. And then following that in the fall, there were reports of it in the Netherlands and primarily in wild birds, and then it's spread into commercial poultry. And then reports from either commercial poultry or wild birds started popping up all over Europe. So places in the UK, Ireland, for instance, Belgium, France, Germany. And then in the, or towards the late fall, reports started coming out of Japan, and then South Korea. And shortly thereafter, then China. And so various places in those countries. And then here more recently, there are reports now in India as well, and back in Iraq. So it seems to be primarily in Europe and Asia, and has not, at least not to my knowledge at this date, been reported in the Western Hemisphere. So the Americas so far have not experienced this H5N8.
While there have been some cases of avian flu in humans, Dr. Reynolds says the transmission happens from live birds and not poultry products.
There's always that potential. That's right. And so it does become a public health concern. It's not considered to be a food transmitted type of situation. It's more of a live bird. And unfortunately, there have been cases of influenza that have infected people through live birds. Hopefully, it's not the most probable, but we do certainly need to keep that in mind and practice good biosecurity.
For the already infected birds, there is no cure for H5N8. Prevention through biosecurity is the best practice for poultry farmers.
In the aftermath of the 2015 avian influenza outbreak, I began a program called the Big Red Biosecurity Program. And now I can put my Big Red Biosecurity cap on, and we have a website, and it's a program designed primarily for poultry, although it's applicable to other species, but it goes through all the precautions and all the, we have educational videos, et cetera, on there, all the things that you can do to make your operation biosecure and prevent not only avian influenza, but other types of diseases as well. We've developed this with both large commercial operations and small flock owners in mind. And we're only as strong as the weakest link. So small flocks out there, we have to be vigilant with them as well. And we have to help them as well.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
Thanks, Maddie. Though the outbreak hasn't reached America, we'll continue to monitor the situation and any impacts it could have on the markets. Next up, one way to utilize invasive eastern red cedar trees is to make biochar out of them. Biochar is a charcoal-like substance made from burning organic biomass, and it has many uses. While it's not approved for the feeding of cattle, studies from around the world suggest that small amounts of biochar in cattle rations may reduce beef methane emissions and improve organic matter digestion. University of Nebraska researchers gained FDA permission to conduct trials of their own, and you can read all about these UNL biochar feeding trials in the February Nebraska Farmer. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. Al, this has been a week where you just don't want to go outside. Tell us, please, are we going to be seeing a warm-up anytime soon?
Well, Troy, this cold weather set in last week just as predicted, and I don't think we're going to see it basically dislodge until we get into at least the middle to the latter half of next week. And if we really want the real warm temperature, I think we're going to have to wait a couple more months before we start to see consistently those temperatures above 50 degrees. And I think we're going to be a long time before we get there, and it probably won't be until we get into March. This recent stretch of cold weather has knocked the above normal temperatures for the entire winter across southern Nebraska almost basically back to normal, and after this stretch this weekend, most likely going to be looking at below normal temperatures for the winter period starting in December, farther north, probably knocking about half of the accumulated surplus of heat that we've seen during the first half of the winter, but we're still going to be running 3 to 4 degrees above normal. So the cold stays in the forecast, and if we go to the upper air model, we have that system that came through over the last 24 hours, pushing that cold air in and developed light snow across western Nebraska. This energy is going to combine with a trough to our south to create some pretty significant snowfall across the central Rocky Mountains. You can see surface lobe developing, the cold air damming up against the rock, creating orographic lift. widespread snowfall, and this will start to move down through the southern plains as we go through the weekend, so that energy drops all the way down into deep southern Texas. We're going to see some widespread precipitation in this region and very, very cold temperatures, sub-freezing in this region, and we may even see single digits, but that snowfall starts to develop, starts to push out rather rapidly through the weekend and move toward the eastern seaboard. So by the time we get into Monday, we'll start to see most of the concentrated snowfall and precipitation with this system moving into the Ohio River Valley in the northeastern United States, but another piece of energy is going to be following it with low pressure developing over the central Rockies. Once again, we're going to get another shot of snowfall moving through the central Rockies and southern Rockies, and that will eventually merge out into the southern plains as that deep trough basically stacks up and that cold air falls all the way down to deep southern Texas. Low pressure starts to develop to this in the southern portion of the jet stream, and we'll start to see moisture spreading from the southern Rockies once again out into the eastern United States, and that last piece of energy rotates around as we get into the midweek period. That shall reinforce most of the energy moving into the eastern United States. For us, the high pressure that has been firmly in control will finally start to slip toward the east. We'll start to see a rebound in temperatures, although they'll only be 5 to 10 degrees a day. It's going to be much better than sub-zero readings. As that cold air itself presses eastward on Thursday, so does the major precipitation shield, and more importantly, as this trough starts to lift out on Thursday and Friday, and the precipitation shield moves up the eastern seaboard, that's going to lift this big upper air trough more toward the northeastern United States and allow some ridging to build into our region, giving us a much more significant warming trend. In fact, we might break the freezing mark across portions of southern Nebraska, and it will feel balmy, even though it'll be a good 10 to 15 degrees below normal, and most of the precipitation stays up in the Pacific Northwest. So the 8 to 14 day forecast from next Thursday to the following Tuesday indicates below normal temperatures, but remember, we should be seeing highs in the mid-40s across southern Nebraska, and we'll be lucky to see the mid-30s. And in terms of precipitation, even though it's a dry trend, the GFS model indicates with that warming trend, as we get into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, there is the possibility of another system coming through the Central Plains.
Thanks, Al. Finally today, the University of Nebraska's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, otherwise known as IANR, has a commitment to the state's 93 counties and the producers that call them home. And after the year we just saw and continue to see, the more than 2,000 people who make up IANR continue to be resilient and innovative in their research, teaching, and extension efforts. IANR Harlan Vice Chancellor Mike Boehm joined me to discuss IANR's accomplishments in 2020, the goals for 2021, and what that means for the state's producers.
There's a quote that says one of the most difficult things as a human to do is to keep two diametrically opposed ideas in your mind at the same time and remain functional. So the faculty, staff, and students of IANR did exactly that. Some specific examples, right? So redialing back to March through May, we were just at the time of calving. We were at the time of planting. So we have extension educators, 182 of them forward deployed across Nebraska, were engaging with our producers. Our farmers were getting ready for planting. Our ranchers were, that spring calve, were just finishing up spring calving, and some of them were moving towards branding. This was a really tricky time, and our extension professionals had to figure out how best to engage our producers during that time period. And of course, then we slipped right into harvest season. I guess thankfully we didn't have a weather year like we did an extreme weather year in 2019. So.
And moving on to 2021, I've heard you mention that it's going to be about reconnection and innovation. Yeah. So to you, what does that look like? Maybe we could start with reconnection.
So reconnecting, it's not that we haven't connected, but I feel, Troy, it's time to get back in as safely as possible, of course, back in contact. It's an odd thing for humans not to be social with one another. I'm looking forward to our field days. We're already talking about what does the summer look like for field days. I only was able to go to one field day. In fact, I think it was the only one that we pulled off. It was at the Panhandle last year. So I think everybody's thinking optimistically, but we know there's a big dose of data when it comes to COVID and the trend numbers. So, knock on wood, things are moving in the right direction. So that's on the extension outreach front, reconnecting.
And then, of course, I think IANR Maybe we should change the I to innovation, because it's all about
Yep.
it's all about innovation, but not only innovation
Yeah.
of what we're doing throughout the state, throughout the university, but also the innovation that is going to be making a mark not only throughout the rest of the country, but the world when it comes to
Yep.
when it comes to ag and education, things like that. And IANR at the forefront, and I know that's going to continue into 2021.
Yeah, no question. So innovation in agriculture and food systems is critical, and the special sauce here is the people, both here on campus, across the state, but also our producers, our ranchers, our farmers, our processors, our bankers, our lenders. Nebraska is home to so many innovators when you think about it. And so when you blend innovative producers and processors and farmers and ranchers with the innovation of something like IANR in this ag natural resource space, it's an amazing partnership that pushes the envelope every day. So think about Nebraska as an ideas laboratory, if you will, for food, water, ag, energy systems. We move ideas into prototypes. Those prototypes then are tested across our statewide platform. Our on-farm research program that is run out of Extension is incredible. The proof's in the pudding, but that proving that out in the field allows for greater adoption, both here in America, in Nebraska and beyond, but also around the world.
The IANR Vice Chancellor and I had a very wide-ranging conversation, and we're only able to show you a little bit of it on today's show. But to see the full interview, head over to the Market Journal Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And if you need a little bit of a teaser, Mike's got a wonderful, heartfelt message for Nebraska farmers and ranchers that you don't want to miss. That's going to do it for this week's show. If you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app or follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. And remember, Valentine's Day is Sunday. Make sure you make it special for that important person in your life. We'll see you right back here next week. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.